The storm came with no warning. No drum of clouds. No scent of rain. Just a sudden darkness in the sky and a sharp, pulsing wind that seemed to breathe in and out across the village like a beast preparing to feed. Even the elders, who always had a saying for everything, rain on a wedding meant children, thunder at dusk meant betrayal, had no words for a storm like this. No story. No omen. Just silence. And in that silence, Naya screamed. Her labor had come on fast. The healer women barely had time to boil water before the pain twisted her back like a bow. She clawed at the woven mat beneath her, sweat glistening on her arms like oil, her eyes wild with agony and instinct. Someone tried to hold her down to keep her from tearing her skin on the edges of the bamboo bed, but she struck blindly, knocked them back. She didn't need comfort. She needed to push. The wind slammed against the shutters again and lightning flashed red, not white, not blue, a blood-colored streak that cut across the thatched roof like a scar. Then came the silence. One breath. Two. And then the final push. Naya gasped, her body going still, waiting to hear the cry. It did not come. She blinked up at the ceiling, her ears straining. She thought maybe she'd gone deaf. Maybe the storm had taken the sound away. But she could hear the wind outside. She could hear the midwife's whisper to her assistant. She could hear the metal bowl shift slightly on the floor. Just not her child. She tried to lift her head, but her strength had left her. Her body trembled from the strain, and her vision blurred with exhaustion and something darker, dread. She opened her mouth to speak, but her tongue was thick. Her throat scraped like stone. Where? She tried. The midwife, old, hollow-eyed and stiff, turned to her slowly. Her hands were stained dark and she held something wrapped in a red cloth, too small and too still. "I'm sorry," she said. "The child didn't make it." Naya stared at her, blinking. That wasn't possible. She'd felt the life inside her. Felt it kick, twist. She talked to it at night. Sang to it. Called it Little Stone after her father. And the child had answered. It had turned toward her voice. It had waited for her. "No," Naya whispered. But the midwife only looked at her with an expression too practiced. Not grief. Not compassion. Just something close to habit. "The storm came hard," she said. "It was fate." Naya shook her head weakly. "Let me see." "It's best you don't," the midwife interrupted. There was a pause, brief and thick. Then her husband entered. Kojo looked like he'd aged 10 years in a night. His face was drawn. His tunic was damp from rain. But it wasn't the storm that chilled Naya, it was his eyes. He didn't look at her. He kept his gaze on the floor. When she called his name, he flinched but didn't answer. "Where is our child?" she croaked. The midwife stepped between them, her voice flat. "Stillborn." Kojo nodded once, still not meeting her eyes. Then he turned and left the room. The red cloth vanished behind the midwife's robe as she slipped out silently, her assistant trailing behind her with the metal bowl. Naya's arms twitched, trying to lift, but her body refused. Her chest heaved, not with sobs but with confusion. With something jagged. Something didn't feel right. She lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling. Listening to the storm recede. No one came back to wash her. No one brought food. Not even a cup of water. The silence wasn't mourning. It was avoidance. Like everyone had agreed not to look at the wound, hoping it would disappear on its own. By dawn she tried to sit up again. Her hands trembled as she reached for her belly, still soft, still marked, and found it empty. Her breasts ached with milk. But there was no baby to feed. In the days that followed, the village behaved as if nothing had happened. A few neighbors came by and murmured their condolences. They brought cassava, dried fish, jars of rice. No one stayed long. No one said her son's name. Because no one had ever asked it. Even Kojo didn't say it. He barely came near her. He slept outside now, under the lean-to. He spent his days chopping wood or tending to the goats, but never looked toward the house when he passed. Naya watched him once, watched how he paused near the corner where the yam vines grew, his hand resting on the post like he might turn and walk back in. He didn't. And still, there was no grave. No burial. No ceremony. She asked the midwife again, quietly, when she returned for another birth nearby. "Where did you bury him?" The woman didn't answer at first. Just looked away and said, "It was handled. Let the spirit rest." Naya stared at her for a long moment. The midwife wouldn't meet her gaze. Wouldn't say a name. Wouldn't say if the child was whole or what color his eyes were, or if he had her grandmother's nose. She left without another word. That night, Naya dreamed of red lightning. And a cry. Faint far away. Calling her name. She woke in the dark, sweat slick on her neck, her hands trembling. The house was silent. Until she heard it again. It was not loud. It was not near. But it was clear. A baby's cry. Not shrill. Not pained. Just longing. And then, Naya. She sat up sharply, her eyes wide. Her chest burned with something that felt like fire and fear. She held her breath. Listened again. Nothing. The next day she said nothing. The pain in her womb ached worse. Her head buzzed. But she did not speak. She could not afford to. No one would believe her. But the next night it came again. A soft cry. Clearer now. And the voice again. Naya. A whisper. A breath. She went to the window. Nothing. Only wind and darkness. No footprints in the dust. No signs of a stranger. But she felt the presence. Not outside. Inside. Something had been taken. Something still called. She began walking during the day. Quietly. Not far. Just to the edge of the forest, where mothers sometimes sang to keep their babies calm in the slings. She listened to each cry. Each coo. Each voice. Nothing matched. Nothing felt like hers. Kojo asked her once what she was doing. Listening, she said. He didn't press. But she noticed how he avoided her eyes afterward. And at night the cry kept coming. Sometimes it said her name. Sometimes it just cried. But it always came at midnight. Always 3 breaths after the wind shifted. Always from nowhere. And everywhere. And Naya began to understand something. Her child had not died. No matter what they told her. No matter what silence filled the house. No matter what shame Kojo swallowed with his downcast eyes. She had carried a life. Felt it. Named it. Loved it. And that life still existed. Somewhere. She knew it in her bones. In the milk that still leaked from her breasts. In the ache that grew sharper with every sunset. They had taken him. But they hadn't buried him. And now he was calling her back. She would not mourn. Not until she found the truth. Because dead things don't cry your name. Not at midnight. Not through a storm. Not with the same breath they first took from your own. Naya did not sleep. Not anymore. She lay on her mat each night, eyes wide, watching the thatched ceiling glow faintly in the dark as moonlight strained through cracks. Her body ached from stillness, but it was her mind that pulsed with noise. Not noise others could hear. Not the rustle of wind or the drip of rain or the distant calls of night birds. It was the cry. It came every night. Exactly at midnight. She had begun to count her breaths in the dark, waiting for it. 40, 50, sometimes more, until the air in her lungs felt like water and her ribs seemed to swell around it. And then it would come. A baby's cry. Not loud. Not shrill. Not the colicky scream of a restless newborn. It was softer than that. Softer than breath. A cry that sounded like it had passed through water or glass or time itself. But it was real. She had heard it every night since the storm. Every night since the lie. It had started a week after the supposed burial. A week after the midwife disappeared for a few days and came back with her apron oddly cleaned and a scar on her neck that she never explained. A week after Kojo stopped answering even the simplest of questions, when he began walking around her like she was made of glass or fire or something else he couldn't hold. Naya had been drifting into sleep when she first heard it. She'd been lying on her side, staring into the dark, the ache in her chest heavier than ever, when a sound reached her, faint, almost lost in the wind. A child. Crying. And just as she sat up, heart crashing in her chest, she heard it, Naya. A whisper. Or not even a word. Just a shape in the cry that sounded like her name, stretched through distance and need. She had scrambled to the window, scanning the fields. The trees. The open path. Nothing. No baby. No light. No voice. But the wind, it had changed. The leaves turned the wrong way. The air felt warmer suddenly, like breath against the back of her neck. She ran outside. Still nothing. Kojo found her wandering barefoot in the garden just before dawn, her eyes glassy, her dress wet from dew. Naya, what are you doing? He whispered, touching her shoulder. She turned slowly to him. Her voice came out strange. He's calling me. Kojo's face changed. He dropped his hand from her shoulder and stepped back like she had burned him. There's no one calling you, he said. He cries every night. It's your grief, he said too fast. You're imagining it. She studied his face. You don't hear it? He hesitated. That told her everything. No, he said finally, turning away. You need rest. She watched him walk back to the house, his shoulders tense, his hands in fists. The next night it came again. This time she was waiting. She didn't move. Didn't breathe. She just listened. And there it was. The cry. Softer than wind but sharper than thought. And again her name. Naya. She clenched her hands. She stayed up until dawn, eyes burning, whispering promises to herself. You are not broken. You are not mad. They are lying. By the fifth night, her body was beginning to unravel. She couldn't eat. Couldn't think. Her hands shook as she carried water. She burnt the stew and forgot to salt the yams. Neighbors stopped by less often. Whispers followed her in the market. She lost the baby and the mind too. Maybe the curse took her. She shouldn't have been born under that moon. They forgot how kind she used to be. How steady. How strong. Now they looked at her and only saw the weight of her silence. Only one woman still greeted her with warmth, Aunt Joma, the old widow who ran the cloth stall. Joma took her by the wrist one morning and looked at her carefully. You hearing it too, child? Naya froze. What? The cry. The midnight one. Her heart jumped. You hear it? Joma nodded slowly. Not every night. Only when the wind is strange. But I hear a baby sometimes. Just for a moment. Then it's gone. Naya's throat tightened. No one believes me. They never do until the thing walks into their house, Joma said. You be careful, girl. That kind of cry, it ain't from a grave. It's from somewhere deeper. Naya almost wept. Almost. Instead, she thanked the old woman and returned home. That night, the wind didn't just shift. It turned. She felt it inside her bones before it reached the trees. She lay flat on her back, staring up, eyes wide, heart hammering. Then the sound came. Clearer than before. The cry rose from the ground, not the sky. It came through the floorboards. Through her skin. It didn't say her name this time. It begged. Ma. Her heart cracked. She curled on her side, pulling the sheet to her chest. The milk had dried from her breasts 2 weeks after the lie, but now they ached again. Sharp burning. Her body was confused, or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it remembered better than her mind. When dawn came, she didn't speak. Not to Kojo. Not to the neighbors. Not even to Joma. Instead, she sat at the edge of her bed and wrote the cry over and over again in the dirt with her finger. Ma, ma, ma. That day she walked the village with no shoes. She went to the edge of every home. Every hut. She stopped at the healer's door but did not knock. She stood outside the midwife's garden but did not enter. She circled the chief's compound 3 times, counting the windows. She noticed a boy there. Chubby-cheeked. Thick hair. His skin darker than the chief's wife. The boy turned his head toward her as she passed. And for just a breath, he looked like her father. She stopped walking. He blinked at her. She took 1 step closer. His nanny came rushing out, scooped him into her arms and turned him away. Do not linger near the child, the woman snapped. Naya didn't move. Her heart beat slowly. The boy hadn't cried. But he had looked. That night the cry came again. This time it was angrier. Moea. It echoed through her walls. She stood. She lit a candle. And she began to hum. Not loud. Not pretty. Just a tune. The same one she'd hummed to her belly every night. And the crying stopped. Instantly. The silence was heavier than the sound. She sat on the floor, eyes wide. And then she heard it, not a cry. A breath. A sigh. Her own name again. But softer. As if someone had just stopped crying and was falling asleep in her arms. Naya. She wept. The next morning, Kojo stood in the doorway with his hands clenched. You need help, he said. Naya looked at him. I need the truth. He didn't answer. She asked him plainly, where is my child? He turned away. Stillborn. You never saw the body. He said nothing. You don't even know if it was a boy or girl. Still nothing. She walked toward him, slowly. Why do you sleep outside, Kojo? He opened his mouth. Closed it again. Then he said, because I hear it too. She stopped. He met her eyes for the first time in weeks. I hear the crying. I hear your name. Then why? Because I made a promise. To who? He looked at the door of the chief's house. And Naya understood. He had traded silence for land. Lies for loyalty. And now the truth lived in a house she could not enter. But it would not stay quiet. Not forever. Because a cry like that could not be buried. Not with soil. Not with secrets. Not with shame. It would rise. Every night. Until someone answered it. It had been 3 weeks since the first cry, and Naya no longer tried to explain herself. Kojo stopped asking her anything. He barely crossed her path now. The few times he did, he looked away quickly as if her gaze might burn him or worse, force the truth from his mouth. The village had turned colder too. Conversation stopped when she passed. The butcher pretended not to see her at the stall. The cloth maker, once warm and chatty, began whispering behind his loom. They all knew something. And they all wanted it buried deeper than a grave. But the cry kept coming. Always at midnight. Always with the wind. Sometimes it said her name. Sometimes it didn't. But it was always real. Then came the morning of the woman by the well. Naya had gone early, long before the sun broke the rim of the forest. She needed water, and more than that, she needed quiet. The world before sunrise felt cleaner, like truth might live in the spaces between the shadows. She carried 2 clay pots and kept her scarf wrapped tight around her head, though her cheeks were streaked with salt. Sleep no longer came to her easily, and dreams were worse than none at all. She reached the well and paused. A woman stood there. Older than anyone in the village. Maybe older than the well itself. Her back was curved like a root. Her hands were gnarled, her wrists thin, but she stood steady, one hand resting on the edge of the stone ring as if she belonged to it. Her dress was gray. Her scarf was red, but so faded it looked more like dried clay. Naya hesitated, then stepped forward. I didn't know anyone else came this early. The woman did not answer at first. She just turned her head slightly and Naya saw her face. It was lined with time. Not soft, gentle lines, but the kind carved by grief, fire, or long winters. Her eyes were milky but alert. And when she smiled, it was the saddest smile Naya had ever seen. You've been hearing it, haven't you? The old woman said. Naya froze. The child's cry, the woman whispered. Calling for his mother. Naya gripped her pot tighter. You hear it too? No, the woman said. But I once did. Naya's chest twisted. You lost a child? The woman looked away. No. I had one stolen. Naya stepped closer, heart pounding. The old woman's voice turned brittle like dry corn husks. They said she was stillborn. Said the storm came to take her back. But I heard her cry for years. Naya's fingers trembled. What did you do? I waited, the woman said. And then I stopped waiting. And I started digging. Naya blinked. Digging? The woman turned to face her fully. Truth is like a root. No matter how deep you bury it, it grows. It bends. It cracks the ground. And one day, someone trips on it and remembers what was meant to be forgotten. She reached out and touched Naya's forehead with 2 fingers, dry as husk. When a mother hears her child at night, she whispered, no grave can hold the lie. Then she turned and walked away, leaving no footprints in the dust. Naya stood frozen for a long time. She forgot her pots. She forgot the water. She only remembered that phrase. No grave can hold the lie. That evening she began her quiet investigation. Not with questions. Not yet. Questions stirred fear. But eyes, those revealed more. She watched Kojo. He always paused before entering the chief's compound. Always looked around as if being followed. He returned with little bags of rice and favors, things he could never afford before. She noted it. Memorized every detail. She watched the midwife. The woman limped now, a new twist to her gait. Her left wrist never moved properly. She had not taken a new birthing in weeks. When she passed by Naya's house, she would not even glance at the door. She watched the chief's wife. Tall, elegant, cold. Always clutching the child too tightly. Always brushing invisible dust from his shoulders. She didn't speak his name often. But she never let the nanny out of sight. Naya once saw her slapping the nanny hard for leaving the baby near a window. The child had only blinked and watched a butterfly. Fear surrounded that house like smoke. Naya began visiting Aunt Joma more often. Under the guise of buying cloth, she asked questions. Subtle ones. Did the chief's wife birth that child herself? No one saw her do it. Did the midwife attend? They say yes, but no one remembers seeing her leave. Was the storm bad that night? Not worse than yours. Bit by bit she pieced the night together. 2 women had gone into labor during the storm. Naya and the chief's wife. Only one baby was announced. And the midwife disappeared for 3 days. Naya returned to the well 2 mornings later. The old woman was gone. But wrapped around the well's wooden beam was a red thread. She took it, tied it around her wrist, and whispered, "Thank you." Then she began digging. Not with shovels. Not in dirt. But in memory. She returned to the hut where she gave birth. It had been cleaned, scrubbed, the mats replaced. But in one dark corner, near the hearth, she found a stain. Faint. Small. Red. Too bright to be blood. Or dye. She scraped it into a leaf and hid it under her shawl. She found the assistant who'd worked with the midwife that night, a young girl with shaking hands who now worked as a thatcher. Naya offered her food, offered silence. And after 3 hours the girl said softly, "They made me look away." "Who?" "The midwife. The woman from the chief's house." "Kojo." The girl cried. Said she never saw the child. Said she only heard the cries, 2 of them. Then one stopped, and the other was taken away. Naya's hands went cold. She returned home and sat in the dark, rocking back and forth. That night, the cry came louder than ever before. It rattled the windows. Kojo came running to the door, pale. "What is that?" "You know what it is," she said. He dropped to his knees. "I had no choice." "You had a choice," she said. "You chose silence. They threatened me. Our farm. Our lives. They stole mine," she whispered. That night she walked through the village under moonlight. The wind had stopped, but the cry echoed in her heart. She approached the chief's house, stood outside, listened, and then she heard it. From within the stone walls. A soft sound. A breath. A voice, just a whisper, "Ma." And Naya knew. The lie could not hold. The grave, if there even was one, could not seal what still lived. And her child had never stopped calling. Ask ChatGPT. The path to the midwife's house was never busy. Even before the storm, even before the lies, people avoided it. The house sat crooked on the farthest bend of the village, tucked between 2 leaning baobabs with trunks like watching eyes. Its roof sagged and the windows were dark even in daylight. A place people went only when they had no other choice. Births, wounds, blood. Naya chose to go when the sun was high. Not out of carelessness but as a signal. Let the village see. Let them whisper. She carried a satchel with dried roots and bitter leaves. Herbs her mother once said could soothe the belly or stir the truth. Around her wrist, the red thread from the well woman still hung, faded now but intact. The midwife answered the door with a squint and a sniff. Her eyes darted across Naya's face as if counting something or checking for cracks. "You," she muttered. "What do you want?" "I've been ill," Naya said, soft, steady. "My stomach won't hold food. My dreams are tangled. I thought, perhaps a tonic?" The midwife grunted and stepped aside. The house smelled of vinegar and ash. The floor creaked under Naya's sandals. Herbs hung from the rafters, long dried, crumbling at the edges. The hearth was cold. "Sit there," the midwife said, pointing to a low stool. "Don't touch anything." Naya obeyed. She watched as the midwife moved through the house with stiff limbs, pulling jars from the shelf, muttering under her breath. Her left wrist still hung strangely, bent, useless. "Add some pepper root," Naya said quietly. The midwife froze. "What?" "Pepper root. For strength." The woman turned slowly. "Who told you that?" "My mother used to." "Your mother wasn't a healer." "No," Naya agreed, but she listened to them. The midwife eyed her. Naya said nothing else. Just watched. The woman turned back to her jars and began to grind a mix with her good hand. As she worked, Naya let her gaze wander. The shelves were cluttered. Bones. Feathers. Stones with holes. Bundles of cloth tied with old twine. A few jars held what looked like ink, but Naya had seen ink before. This was thicker, darker. One shelf sagged from the weight of tiny clay dolls, each with a different symbol carved into the chest. Then she saw it. Tucked behind a basket of garlic skins. A roll of cloth, pale blue, tied with a single black string. She looked away quickly. Too quickly. "Water," she said when the midwife's back turned. "Could I have some?" The woman grunted again. By the door. Naya stood, crossed the room and bent slowly. In the moment the midwife reached for the firewood, Naya reached too. Her fingers closed around the cloth bundle. She slid it into her satchel under the guise of rummaging for a cup. She turned back, smiling faintly. "Thank you." The midwife poured the tonic into a cracked wooden bowl. "Drink this before dusk. You'll sweat. That's how you'll know it's working." Naya nodded. The bowl was bitter. She let it touch her lips, barely, and then pretended to cough. "Strong," she said. "Truth usually is," the woman muttered. Naya left quickly, her heart slamming in her chest. She didn't stop walking until she was far beyond her home, deep into the woods near the abandoned goat path. Only then did she drop to her knees and open the bundle. It was delicate, baby cloth, the kind swaddled tight around a newborn. Faded with time. But something had been drawn onto the inside in dark pigment, a small sketch of a child's leg. On the leg a mark. A birthmark, round like a seed. Just below the knee. Naya's breath caught. She remembered. She remembered the push, the pain, the burn of birth. She remembered the sound, not one but two cries. She remembered the weight of the child placed in her arms for only a moment. And she remembered a glimpse of that mark, just before everything turned to blur and storm. She held the cloth to her chest, her breath shaky. Then she heard it, the wind shift. Footsteps behind her. She turned. The midwife stood at the edge of the path, her face unreadable. "I knew you'd steal it," she said. "Just like your mother." Naya stood slowly, the cloth still clutched in her hand. "What does that mean?" The midwife took a step forward. "Your mother asked too many questions too. She believed every cry, every dream. She kept digging until something dug back." Naya's voice was firm. "Where is my child?" The woman's face twisted. "Gone. Hidden. Dead if you keep this up." Naya's jaw clenched. "Then why keep the cloth?" The midwife looked away. "To remember," she said finally. "To remember what I did." Naya stepped closer. "You switched them." The midwife didn't answer. "You handed him over," Naya said louder now. "To them?" Still no answer. "You lied." "I was told to," the woman said, voice tight. "You think I had a choice? I'm not proud, girl. I carry their ghost, same as you." Naya's hand shook. "Why?" she whispered. The midwife's eyes filled with something close to sorrow. "Because your child was born under a storm. The same night the chief's wife lost hers, still and cold. They said the village couldn't survive another omen. Said the gods chose you to carry the burden." "But it wasn't theirs to choose," Naya said. "No," the woman agreed. "But they did." There was a long silence. Then the midwife stepped closer, her good hand reaching out. "Give me the cloth." Naya stepped back. "No. You don't want what comes next." "Yes," Naya said, folding the bundle and tucking it back into her satchel. "I do." The old woman's face hardened. "Then you'll lose everything." "I already did." She turned and walked away. The wind followed her all the way home. That night, the cry didn't come from the wind. It came from inside her house. From the corner of the room. She turned, heart thundering. Nothing there. Only her mat. Only the pot. Only the candle. But the air smelled different. Like warm milk. And rain. And breath. And Naya knew, the grave was breaking. The lie was cracking. And the truth, the child, was waking up. The compound gates were carved from thick baobab wood, their edges scorched black from a fire that no one in the village spoke of anymore. It was said the chief had them reforged, sanctified by 4 elders, blessed by a prophet from across the river. Naya had only passed them once, the day she was forced to leave the healer's hut without her child. But now she came on market days. Slowly. Purposefully. She would bring sweetroot leaves or pressed oil cakes, claim she was there to sell or trade, then linger just outside the gate, near the edge of the courtyard wall. From there, if the guards were distracted or if the nanny moved too far toward the shade, she could glimpse the boy. The first time she saw him, she didn't breathe for nearly a minute. He was chasing a leather-wrapped ball. Thin but strong-legged. His skin was the warm brown of the late-season earth after the rains, and his hair curled with a defiance she remembered from her younger brother. But it wasn't his body that struck her still. It was his eyes. Dark at the center. But ringed with that rare, pale bronze Naya had only seen once before, in her grandmother. Her grandmother, who had died before Naya turned 9, whose image Naya kept tucked in the corner of memory, wrapped in warmth and turmeric-scented laughter. And there, in this boy's gaze, that same fire flickered. Not just color. Essence. No one else in the village had those eyes. No one but Naya. He was standing still now. The ball had rolled into a bush and he turned slowly, as if feeling something. Their eyes met. And though he was just a child, for maybe 5 years old, he didn't flinch or hide behind the nanny. Instead he stared. A long, almost thoughtful stare. Then he tilted his head. It wasn't recognition. Not yet. But something stirred in her chest. Ancient. Animal. The next day she returned. This time with a string of blue glass beads. She knew the chief's house staff liked to trade for butter and salt. She stood at the edge again. The boy was there. Sitting on a low stool. His fingers curled around a seed pod. His gaze distant. Again he looked up. Again their eyes met. Again that tilt of the head. Like a thread pulling taut. Naya went home trembling. She dug out the old cloth again, the one with the mark. The drawing of the tiny leg, the round birthmark like a pressed bean just under the knee. She had seen it once. The night her child was born. Before the storm's wind blew out the lantern. Before the midwife's scream. Before they took him. She remembered clutching that tiny leg. Remembered pressing her thumb to the warm flesh of it. Remembered that mark. She could just see his legs. On the third visit she brought mango leaves for trade. She came closer. Just close enough. And there, while the nanny turned her head to scold a servant boy, Naya saw it. The child had fallen in the dust while running. His tunic lifted slightly. Just for a second. But enough. The mark. Small. Round. Just beneath the knee. Naya turned away, her breath ragged. She didn't cry. She couldn't. There were no tears strong enough for a grief that had started to live like a second heart. Back home she lit no fire. Ate no food. Just sat with her hands on her knees, palms up, eyes fixed on the crack in the wall that let the moonlight in. She waited for the midnight cry. It didn't come. Instead, a knock. Soft. Uncertain. She rose barefoot. Opened the door. A child's voice whispered from the shadows. "Are you the woman who watches me?" Her breath caught. The boy. He stood alone in the dark. Barefoot too. Dust on his cheek. The guards. The nanny. Gone? No, not gone. Sleep. Something had made them sleep. She knelt. He looked at her wide-eyed, serious. "I heard you calling," he said. "Not with your mouth, but with your inside voice." Naya reached for him, gently, afraid even of the wind. "What's your name?" He paused. "They call me Kofi. But sometimes I dream of another name. A soft one. I don't remember." She swallowed. "Do you know me?" He tilted his head again. "You smell like the warm room. The one with the songs." She choked on her breath. He stepped closer. "There's a mark on my leg," he said. "The woman says it's nothing. But in my dreams someone kisses it." Naya lowered her head, hands shaking. "That was me," she whispered. The air around them shifted. Suddenly, footsteps. Voices. The nanny's shout, a guard's bark. Naya turned to hide him, but the boy stepped back. "It's okay," he said. "You know now. That's enough." He ran. Swift and silent, like a wisp. They never found out he'd come. But from that night forward, the cry stopped. Replaced by dreams. In hers, he always stood in a field of tall grass, holding seeds, looking back at her. And the mark on his leg glowed like gold. Ask ChatGPT. The house was quiet, but not in the way homes should be. It was the quiet of something waiting to break. Naya sat at the edge of her mat, her back straight, the sky outside beginning to bleed red with sunset. The blue cloth with the birthmark lay in her lap, folded once, like an offering. Her fingers pressed its corners flat, again and again, trying to calm the tremble that had started earlier and wouldn't stop. Her husband arrived just as the sky slipped into indigo. He entered as he always did, muttering greetings, dusting off his sleeves, pausing to pour himself water from the jug without looking at her. She watched him. Not his movements, but the way his shoulders tensed when he noticed the silence hadn't greeted him back. "Is something wrong?" he asked, his voice too casual. She didn't answer. He glanced at her, caught the blue cloth in her hands and stopped. "Where did you find that?" he said. Not harsh, but careful. Still she didn't speak. He came closer, slowly, until he stood over her. His eyes dropped to the folded cloth, then to her hands. The silence between them cracked like thin ice. "Naya," he said, "why are you holding that?" Her eyes met his. And then she asked, quietly, evenly, as if she were asking about whether, "Whose son lives in the chief's house?" His throat twitched. "The chief's, of course." She nodded. "The one with my grandmother's eyes?" He said nothing. She stood, the cloth still in her hand. "He came to my door last night. He knew me, somehow. He said I smell like the warm room." The color drained from her husband's face. "That doesn't mean—" "He has the mark," she interrupted. That silenced him. "I saw it," she said. "The same mark from that night. The one on my child's leg." He swallowed hard. "The chief's son," she said, each word slow, "is mine." Still he said nothing. Her voice rose. "Say it. Say something." He didn't look away. His face, always calm, always measured, now wore something fragile, like glass pretending to be stone. Finally he exhaled. A long, slow breath. And then he said, "Yes." The word fell between them like an axe. "Yes," he repeated, barely above a whisper. "He is yours." Naya stepped back. The cloth in her hand no longer felt like fabric. It felt like fire. "You knew." Her voice was ragged. "You let me bury an empty wrap? You let me scream for days while they told me he was gone, and you knew?" He sat on the edge of the stool, his hands trembling. "I didn't want to," he said. "But they came the day before the storm. The chief's firstborn had died. His wife had bled out. They needed a child, a boy born under the storm. The priest had read omens, said it had to be that night. They offered land. A new title. They said it would save the village, bring peace. They said it would only work if the mother didn't know. Niall laughed. A bitter, dry sound. So you sold your son. I didn't sell him, he said too quickly. I was told it was sacrifice. That he'd be raised like royalty. That he'd never want. They said you'd forget in time. She turned away, her shoulders stiff. I heard his cry every night for 5 years, she said. That was my forgetting. Her husband stood. I thought I was doing what was best. For all of us. You did it for land, she said. You traded flesh for dirt. Silence again. He took a step toward her, but she held up her hand. No. Naya, please. I nursed him, she whispered. For 1 hour. 1 perfect hour. I remember the weight of him. The way he gripped my finger. And you let them take that from me? He flinched. She walked to the door. Her sandals scraped against the clay floor. When she reached it, she turned to look at him one last time. There are things that break, Kweku, she said. But even broken things can be carried. Then she opened the door and stepped into the dusk. He called her name. She did not turn back. And when the door swung closed behind her, it didn't echo. Because something deeper had already shattered. Midnight came like breath held too long. The sky was ink-dark, thick with stars that blinked like restless watchers. Naya lay awake, her palms flat on the earth beside her sleeping mat, eyes open, waiting. She didn't know for what. Only that something was coming. The cry began soft as always, a mule, a whisper curled beneath the wind. But this time it didn't fade. It grew. Like a tide refusing to pull back. Naya sat upright. The sound poured through the walls, not from any single direction, not the door, nor the cracked window, nor the roof's thatch, but from every grain of air around her. The wail swelled and swelled, no longer just a cry but a calling. A sound like grief remembered. A sound like truth unburied. Then, a snap. The tiny window above her mat cracked down its center. Not from force. Not from wind. But from the sound alone. Glass split like dry bone. A fine web of lines spread outward, catching moonlight like a spider's net. Outside, dogs began to howl. Across the village, lamps flickered to life. Shadows stirred. Doors creaked open. Old men muttered blessings into the wind. In the chief's compound, a servant burst from the sleeping quarters, shouting hoarsely into the dark. The guards gathered. Inside the great house, the child lay convulsing on silken sheets. His breath came in gasps. His eyes were wide, wild. His hands clutched at the air as if trying to grasp something just beyond reach. He moaned one word again and again, not in pain but in confusion. Ma, ma, ma. The chief stood at the child's bedside, pale as cloth, shouting for the healer, for the priest, for anyone who could explain what was happening. But no one could. No one understood. Except Naya. She was already kneeling by her hearth, crushing dried marula bark into powder. Her fingers were steady. Her breath calm. She added sage. A drop of her own blood. Then she tied 3 white feathers into a braid of her own hair and placed it atop the mixture. The bowl she chose was old, carved from black stone, passed down from her mother's mother's mother. A bowl used only when the veil between worlds had thinned. She lit no fire. She didn't need one. As the cry outside rose and trembled, the contents of the bowl began to glow. Soft at first. Then pulsing. Like a heartbeat. She whispered the child's name, not the one the chief gave him, but the one she had whispered into his ear the moment he first opened his eyes. The name no one else knew. The crying faltered. Outside, the wind changed direction. It no longer moved with the branches. It circled her home, spiraling as if gathering. She stood, lifted the bowl, and stepped into the moonlight. The villagers had begun to gather in 2s and 3s, drawn by the cry, the crack of glass, the rumors now stirring like smoke. Naya walked through them like a shadow with purpose. Some parted for her. Some stepped back in fear. But all watched. She said nothing. She walked straight toward the hill above the chief's compound, the one where the sacred tree grew, where the air always smelled of old things. There she knelt. She placed the bowl at the base of the tree and whispered, "Come." The cry fell silent. The wind stopped. In the chief's house, the child took one breath, long, clean, free, and then slept. But outside, every lantern died. Not from wind. Not from hands. But from something that didn't want to be seen. And in the dark, the earth shifted. The ritual had begun. And the truth, buried so long ago, was rising. The moon sat like a silver bowl overturned in the sky, its light spilling across Naya's yard, catching in the curve of her cheekbones and the bowls lined carefully in a half-circle before her. She moved with deliberate slowness, her breath even, her fingers sure. Each item had been chosen not only for its meaning but for its memory. She crushed the dried petals of the first flower that bloomed after her son's birth, a soft white blossom from the bush that only opened during thunderstorms. She set beside it the comb her mother had used, its teeth still dusted with years of oil and smoke. Next came the shell bracelet her grandmother had given her with the whispered words, "For your firstborn. For the storm." At the center of the circle she placed a smooth stone, river-worn and flat, etched with a name, Akello. The name she had whispered the moment her son opened his eyes. The name she had carried inside her, like breath trapped beneath her tongue for 5 long years. She sat cross-legged, the earth cool beneath her. From a pouch sewn into her sash she pulled the final item, a single drop of her own blood, dried into cloth from the night she'd heard his cry for the first time. Naya closed her eyes. The village was hushed behind her, asleep or pretending to be. No torches burned nearby. Only the moon bore witness. She placed both hands over the stone and exhaled, her voice low but steady. "I call you not from the house of lies, but from the place you were born. I call you not by the name they gave but by the name you were sung into. Come, Akello." She repeated the name. Once, twice, a third time. The leaves on the tree above her shivered, though the night had no breeze. She pressed her forehead to the stone. "I am your mother. I did not forget. I did not surrender. Come." The bowl in front of her trembled. Water within it rippled outward, though nothing had touched it. And then, the wind came. Not a gust. Not a whisper. It surged. It howled low and sharp, circling the ritual ring like a thread being pulled tight. Her braids lifted. The shells on her wrist clattered together like teeth. She did not flinch. From across the village came a sound, distant but distinct. A child's voice. Screaming. Her name. Naya. Naya. Again. Naya. She opened her eyes. The wind snapped against her face. Her breath caught. She did not rise, only sat taller. Across the compound walls in the chief's house, a boy woke with a cry that shattered the silence like stone thrown into still water. Servants rushed in shouting. The nanny stumbled, clutching at the boy as he writhed and sobbed. He called the name over and over again. Naya. Naya. He had never said it before. But now his voice wouldn't stop. He screamed her name as if it were being torn from his chest. As if it were the only word he had ever known. In the clearing Naya's eyes filled but no tears fell. The wind settled. The bowl stilled. The name had been spoken. By morning the boy's voice was hoarse. His throat rasped with each call but he would not stop. Even when his lips cracked, when his eyes swam with fever, one word kept rising from him like a chant carved into his soul. Naya. The chief had summoned 3 healers, 2 priests, and 1 trembling elder who specialized in spirit attachments. None could calm the child. They burned incense. They chanted over his bed. They bound beads around his wrists. Nothing worked. The moment Naya stepped through the doors of the compound, silent, barefoot, still covered in chalk from her ritual, the boy fell quiet. He looked at her. Eyes rimmed red, arms trembling from exhaustion, he raised one small hand. She walked to him and knelt. He curled into her chest without a sound as if he had always belonged there. The room, filled with whispers and tension, dropped into silence. The chief stared. The priest cleared his throat. This is only coincidence. But the old healer spoke next. Her voice was sharp. "I have seen this before. Not in this village but in the southern fields. A mother ripped from her child. And when she called the name aloud under a sacred moon, the bond tore through lies like blade through cloth. The midwife was summoned. She did not deny it. She trembled as Naya held the boy. When questioned, she shook her head slowly. I was ordered. Promised gold and protection. I told them it would never hold, but they insisted. The storm would cover it. They said the child would forget. But she didn't, someone said. No, the midwife replied, her voice hollow. And neither did he. The chief looked between the gathered elders, his expression unreadable. She lies. There is no proof this boy is not mine. Naya didn't speak. Instead, she reached into her wrap and pulled out a folded cloth, the one she had found behind the midwife's house. She unfolded it carefully. Inside was the hand-stitched mark, a soft spiral shaped like a seedling, the very same that bloomed faintly on the child's upper thigh. Check him, she said. The priest hesitated. Check, she repeated. And when they did, they found it. The same birthmark. The same curve. Same place. Still, the chief insisted. Marks mean nothing. It could be coincidence. So the healer, the oldest among them, suggested a test. Blood. The village had old ways, rituals of ancestry. Pricking the skin, watching how a mother's blood reacted with her child's under the moon. Few used it anymore. It was delicate. Sacred. And it left no room for denial. That night, under the witness of every elder and priest, Naya and the boy sat in the center of the square. She held him in her lap as the healer carefully drew a single drop of blood from each of them. Her finger, his toe. They placed the drops side by side on a sacred leaf, then added a drop of oil. If the blood curled inward together, joined like twins, the bond would be undeniable. The village watched as the two drops slid toward one another. Then touched. Then spiraled into a single crimson thread, tight and sure. No one spoke for a long while. The chief's jaw tensed. His wife turned away weeping. One of the younger elders muttered a prayer into his hands. The boy leaned his head on Naya's shoulder. She stroked his back slowly, whispering something no one else could hear. By dawn, the decision was made. The midwife was banished, sent across the river without blessing or protection. The chief was stripped of his title. He did not resist. He only stared as Naya walked away, her son in her arms, his fingers curled into her braid. The village would never speak of it openly. But shame hung heavy in every alley, every morning greeting, every bowl passed from hand to hand. And though the boy never screamed again, the sound of his voice had already cracked something deeper than glass. It had cracked the lie.